Welcome to Chapter 18, the urinary system. The urinary system is comprised of four major organs. Let's take a peek. I'll draw this. I think that's easiest to draw. All right. So, Chapter 18, urinary. All right. The urinary system is made up of the paired kidneys. The kidneys make urine, as well as a lot of other things. It transports the urine by way of the ureters or ureters to store the urine within the urinary bladder before making its way out through the urethra. There it is. So we have kidneys, we have the ureter, the urinary bladder, and then the urethra, or urine will make its way to the outside world. Okay, let's go back to our study guide and put that in here. Okay, so kidneys, ureter, urinary bladder, and urethra. Here's a little picture from the textbook. So not only does it make urine and transport and store urine and allow it to be released from the body, but there are lots of other functions that the urinary system does. Let's take a peek and talk briefly about them. Excretion. So it's not just urine, which includes a lot of water, but there are things dissolved in that urine that sometimes we need to also get rid of, such as urea. So there are byproducts that are made by metabolism, and urea is one of them. Okay. Regulates blood volume and pressure, and it does that through the water content of our body. So the urinary system really controls the amount of water in our body, in our blood, and regulates that. And by also regulating that, it can regulate pressure also. Okay. Regulates blood solute concentration. So a solute is something dissolved in a solvent. So, we can have the solvent, the best solvent is water, and we have things dissolved in the water. Okay. But we can, with the urinary system, can control or regulate those things that are dissolved in the fluids within our body. And we'll talk about some of those things in later parts of this lecture. Regulates extracellular fluid pH. Okay, and by controlling the hydrogen ion concentration of our blood, we can control pH of blood. Okay, and I'll show you where in the kidneys we can do that. Regulates erythrocyte production. Erythrocytes, remember, are red blood cells. And the kidney makes a hormone called erythropoietin. Erythropoietin is the hormone that stimulates the production of red blood cells. And we talked a little bit about that when we talked about blood doping and, red blood cells. All right. And regulates vitamin D synthesis, controlling, and then vitamin D is important in calcium absorption. Okay. All right. So let's take a look at some anatomy. Okay. Some kind of taking a look at the kidneys specifically and what it is within the kidneys that can control all these things, that can regulate all these things. All right, so actually I think I'm going to draw a kidney. So let's go ahead and go back and draw that. All right, so So I'm going to first draw just kind of a little kidney to give you an idea of some basic parts to the kidney. All right. So there is an outer region of the kidney called the renal cortex. Okay. And then an inner part of the kidney called the renal medulla. You may have figured out that renal refers to kidney. And then there's this space here, kind of in the middle, called the renal pelvis, which collects the urine before it makes its way out the ureter. Okay, and now I'm going to draw another kidney, but we're going to put a lot more detail into that kidney. So this just gives you an idea because there's some confusion that happens when I go to the kind of the more detailed version. But I want you to remember that there's an outer region, there's an inner region, and then there's this space here called the renal pelvis. And we see this kind of orientation throughout the body, the cortex, even in like the brain or the adrenal gland or the, you know, where's there a hair, right? There's a cortex, which is an outer layer, and then the inner part would be the medulla. So it's a theme that we see a lot. So it applies here in the kidney also. All right, let's take a look at a more detailed version of a kidney. All right. Well, actually, before I get to the big kidney, I want to just go back. I forgot that someone had asked me about the vitamin D and how that plays a role in controlling calcium ions in the blood. So just really quickly, maybe I'll put it over here. Because you may know that like sunlight is supposed to help with your vitamin D. So how it kind of works is the sun light stimulates in the skin a conversion of a molecule. What is 7? So just a molecule in the skin to become a vitamin D precursor. So we're not vitamin D yet, but it's a molecule that will become vitamin D. So the vitamin D precursor can go to different places. One of the places it can go is the kidneys, where it is kind of goes through the final processes of being converted into vitamin D. And it's this vitamin D that's going to help increase calcium ion absorption in the gut, in the digestive system. Absorption. Right. And so calcium ions are very important, right, in your bones. And oops, let me see. In muscles, right? Muscle contraction and lots of places. So we have to tightly regulate calcium ions. And this is just one way to do it. And the kidneys do play a role in it. So if you have kidney disease, you have to be careful about bone deficiency and things like that. That you may not, link those two things together. All right. Sorry, I just remembered that someone wanted me to talk a little bit more about that. So let's take a closer look at the kidney. Okay. And draw a bigger kidney, a little bit more detail. Okay. Now, a little bit more detail. I am going to divide the kidney into regions, but then there's going to be these little triangular sections found within the inner part of the kidney. Remember the medulla part? So that's why people get confused at this point. So we do still have our renal cortex. And we have our renal medulla here, but the renal medulla is now made up of these individual triangular sections called renal pyramids. All right. We have our renal pelvis. And then there's this kind of indentation here called the hilum. Okay. And we would have, renal artery coming in, renal vein taking blood out. Okay. What the kidneys basically do is they filter the blood. So as blood comes in through the renal artery, there's a very extensive blood supply pathway within the kidney, each kidney, and then it filters it. Okay, and we'll take a little closer look at that process as we look at the microscopic part of this. Okay, so the kidney is made up of microscopic structures called nephrons. So a nephron is the kind of the basic, what we call the basic functional unit of the kidney. All right. And I'm going to draw kind of where it sits in the kidney. There's a part of that nephron that is in the cortex, and part descends down into the pyramids within the medulla. All right. So this would be the nephron. And we have about like 1 million nephrons in every kidney. And each nephron is working to make urine as well as regulate these different things in our body. All right, let's go back to our okay, and we're going to put a few things here. Let's get a picture here. So what is the basic functional unit? It is the nephron. Show you the kidney. Okay. Let's take a closer look at the nephron now. And actually, I'm going to draw this also. Get a new piece of paper. So the nephron is just a bunch of tubules. Okay. And the beginning of the nephron looks something like this. It's a capsule. Okay, it's actually like a ball that's hollow in the middle. There is a tubule located after that. Then it dips down into the medulla. There's a lot more details, but we're going to kind of simplify it. And it's going to come back to this region where it's going to connect to other nephrons or connect other nephrons by way of another tubule here. That's going to collect the urine from different nephrons here. Okay, so something like this. So this is our nephron. Let's go ahead and label it. This part here is called the glomerular capsule. Sometimes called the Bowman's capsule, named after a person, hence the capitalization. So when you see a capitalization in a name, it's usually somebody's, in a structure, it's usually somebody's name. All right, so glomerular capsule. Remember glomerulus, the word glomer, I think it was. We looked at like the adrenal cortex, okay, one of the different layers. That word means in Latin or Greek, it means ball, like ball of yarn. So because that's what it looks like a giant ball. I'm drawing a section through it, okay, but imagine it going all the way around, forming a ball. Now, within the glomerular capsule, there are capillaries. I'm going to draw it like this, capillaries. And there is an arteriole leading in and an arteriole exiting. All right, this ball of capillaries. So this ball, it's another ball, is called the glomerulus. Okay, so the glomerulus really refers to a ball of capillaries, but there's another ball surrounding it called the glomerular capsule. Together, these two structures are called the renal corpuscle. The renal corpuscle. Okay. So I hope you can kind of see as blood enters through this vessel called the afferent arteriole and leaves by way of the efferent arteriole. Okay, it's going to push substances across the capillaries into the glomerular capsule. All right, this section here is called the proximal convoluted tubule, or the PCT. Okay. Then there's this long section that extends down into the renal pyramid or the medulla called the nephron loop, sometimes referred to as the loop of Henle, named after a person. It will pass back up and then through, very distinguished, okay, through another tubule called the distal convoluted tubule, where then it will connect to the collecting ducts, which collects the urine from different nephrons. Okay, and then it will transport it down. Okay, now, once we have the anatomy of the nephron, now let's take a look at the physiology. What's going to happen? How do we make urine? That's the question. So we begin here at the renal corpuscle. Blood entering, notice it's a larger diameter as it enters into the glomerulus, the ball of capillaries, but the efferent arteriole is smaller in diameter. So what that does is it promotes materials moving, kind of pushes through high pressure, pushes it into the glomerular capsule. Okay. This process is called glomerular filtration. I'm going to put a number 1 here. The numbers will refer to the processes that are happening. So a bunch of stuff is pushed across. What kind of stuff? small things. Large molecules stay in the blood, like cells, proteins. Those are too big to pass across into the glomerular capsule. But small stuff like water, glucose, amino acids, certain ions, right? Lots of stuff is going to be pushed into the glomerular capsule. From here, the filtrate, okay, what's going to be urine, right? As it makes its way out, it's going to be urine. So this is going to be urine. But it gets modified as it moves through these tubules. So in the proximal convoluted tubule, it's surrounded by blood vessels. The whole capillary, the whole kidney, the nephrons are all surrounded by capillaries. So substances that we may want to keep, okay, we want our glucose, we want ions, we want amino acids. We don't want that to stay in the nephron because if it stays in there, we urinate it out. So there's this place here at the proximal convoluted tubule where we can take back or reabsorb a lot of the things that we want. This process is called tubular reabsorption. Number one here is called glomerular filtration. Right? So if you filter something, the big stuff stays behind and the small molecules pass through. Think of like, making coffee or something. You have a filter paper and the grounds and the big things stay behind, but the water and the coffee molecules will pass through the filter because they're small. And then that's what you drink. All right, so here we have an opportunity to take back all those things that we want. What kind of things? Like glucose, amino acids, um, ions. Okay, whatever we want, we take it back. It passes down here, and this actually gives us the ability to really concentrate our urine. If you take physiology, you'll learn more about that process, but we can concentrate our urine because of properties in and around the nephron loop. But as it comes up here, we come to a different process. Here's our blood vessels. Again, the capillaries are all surrounding these structures. We have an opportunity to get rid of stuff. All right. This process here is called tubular secretion. All right. What kind of stuff can we get rid of? Excess. So if we have too many hydrogen ions, potassium ions, and other substances, we can get rid of right there. So let's say to control the blood pH, if we have too many hydrogen ions, that would make our blood acidic. So here's a place where we can dump hydrogen ions. We can secrete it back into the nephron and control our pH that way. All right. So then whatever's left here makes its way into the collecting duct and out as urine. Okay. It's complicated and there's actually more that happens there, but this gives you a good idea of how the nephron works. And again, we have, a million of them each working and making urine. Now, here's a couple interesting facts. So how much do we urinate in a day? You think, an average about 1.5 liters per day of urine we produce. How much fluid and substances, how much passes across into the glomerular capsules each day? So glomerular filtration, we get about 175 liters per day. No, I take it back. It's like 180 liters. 180 liters per day. Think of a liter bottle, okay? 180 liters. pass through our nephrons. All right, that's a lot of fluids, but only 1.5 liters, okay, ends up coming out as urine. So what does that tell you? It tells you the ability of the nephrons to reabsorb that material is very great. So what do we reabsorb? 170 78.5 liters per day is reabsorbed back in the body. So, it makes you think about your urine. Okay, sometimes you produce a lot of urine, sometimes you don't produce as much. It changes in the day depending on, lots of things. We'll talk a little bit about that regulation process of urine production. All right. So you can take a picture of that and then, put that in your study guide if you want. You don't have to. All right, let's go back to our study guide. And fill that all in. So, let's answer the question. The parts of the nephron and their functions. Okay, so the renal corpuscle, where glomerular filtration takes place. Proximal convoluted tubule, tubular reabsorption takes place. Nephron loop, distal convoluted tubule, where tubular secretion occurs here. Now, there's tubular reabsorption occurring all along the nephron and tubular secretion occurring all along the nephron, but the majority of these processes occur in those areas. Let me get you a picture here too. Okay, this one's going to show several nephrons. And there are actually different kinds of nephrons. All the nephrons aren't the same. There's some that are really long and ones that are really short. And even different animals have different lengths of nephron loops. And the longer the nephron loop, the better ability you are to conserve water. So there are some organisms that live in the desert that have really long nephron loops and have a great ability to reabsorb water, so they don't need to drink as much water, right? They can live on very little water because they're so good at keeping the water that they do have in their bodies. So, all right, let's take a look here. This is showing a little better. We can see the glomerulus and then the glomerular capsule around it, proximal convoluted tubule. And then this is even a more detailed view of the renal corpuscle. All right, where we can see the glomerulus here. Here's the afferent arteriole and the efferent arteriole. Here's the glomerular capsule around it. And then this is part of the distal convoluted tubule. But, kind of showing that pressure that pushes material across into the glomerular capsule. All right. Couple other questions. A diuretic. What's a diuretic? You've probably heard of that term before. A diuretic is anything that makes you pee more, increases your urine output. So think of the things that make you pee more. All right, you drink coffee, you might have to pee more. You drink alcohol, maybe it makes you pee more. All those things act as diuretics. Okay, now how they work, it's different depending on what the drug is, but if it makes you pee more, then it is a diuretic. All right, so if you recall in endocrine system, we secrete, our posterior pituitary gland secretes a hormone called anti-diuretic hormone. Okay, so if a diuretic causes you to pee more, what do you think anti-diuretic does? it causes you to pee less. In other words, it helps you to conserve water. So, so this hormone is released when we need more water. Okay. And throughout the day, it could vary on whether it's released or not. So if you are a person who drinks a lot of water, okay, you don't need to conserve water because you're drinking a lot of water. And so you don't secrete ADH, and therefore that water just kind of passes through you. Okay, so people who drink a lot of water pee a lot, right? But let's say you don't drink a lot of water. Your body needs a certain amount of water. So instead, what it does is it secretes the hormone, antidiuretic hormone. And what it does is it acts on the distal convoluted tubule and collecting ducts, and it changes or increases the permeability to water. So let's take a peek at that. Are we still on our, okay, all right. All right, so how does that work? So here's the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. So ADH increases the permeability to water. So with ADH, antidiuretic hormone, it's going to act on these tubules and make it more, holy. It actually puts little channels, water channels in the membrane. And therefore, water that, let's say, is in your blood will now, or actually water here, this is the water here, that would have left in the urine now can leave the nephron and go back into the blood and increase water content in the body. All right. And so, we can play around with this. Certain drugs decrease the permeability, and so the water stays in the nephron. Okay, but when we want to conserve water, we open those channels up, and the water stays in our body, and therefore we urinate less, right? And I think most people know that if they don't drink a lot of water, they don't have to pee a lot. And it does get kind of dangerous with the elderly who don't want to have to get up in the middle of the night and go pee a lot. So they don't drink a lot of water. And so that's why a lot of elderly have problems with dehydration, right? So you have to be really careful with that. Okay, but that's how ADH works. It increases the permeability of these tubules to water, and so more water leaves the nephron, stays in the body, and we urinate less. Okay, now, how does alcohol work? Alcohol actually inhibits the release of antidiuretic hormone. I'll put that here. Alcohol causes less ADH. So without ADH, these channels don't open, okay, or you decrease the permeability. So the water stays in the nephron and you pee it out. Now, the danger is that you could actually be dehydrated, okay, when you drink alcohol. And if you are dehydrated, this is kind of overriding your natural processes in conserving water. So if you drink alcohol, you have to remember to drink water also so you don't become dehydrated, because your normal mechanism of secreting ADH to conserve water isn't working, right? Okay, again, just stuff that you should know, right? If you drink alcohol and it's messing with your nephrons, you should at least know what it's doing, and maybe to be able to prevent that hangover that happens after, right? All right, let's go ahead and put some answers in our study guide. Okay, the question is, what's a diuretic? What is ADH? How does its secretion by the posterior pituitary gland affect urine output? How does alcohol affect you? Okay, So here you go. A diuretic is any substance that increases urine output, makes you pee more. ADH acts on the distal convoluted tubule collecting ducts, increasing permeability of water, permeability to water, and makes us keep more water in our body, thus peeing less. Alcohol inhibits ADH. All right. Let's finish off with some, just a couple diseases, disorders of the urinary system. Diabetes insipidus. So we use the term diabetes. I've used that, but I've said diabetes mellitus or mellitus, right? That's why we don't just say diabetes, because there's different kinds. Diabetes insipidus involves ADH. Okay. So where you don't secrete ADH. There's some people who don't secrete ADH, those normal mechanisms to conserve water. So these people will urinate a lot. They'll pee a lot and become dehydrated. So it's a little different, very different from diabetes mellitus, but both result in an increase in urine output. The other thing is urinary tract infection, UTI. And the question is, why are females more prone to UTI? So the question is first, what is a UTI? Urinary tract infection. Careful, it's tract, not tract infection. And females are more susceptible to them because their urethras are shorter. And plus, the opening to the urethra is closer to the anus, right? And in the anus, that's where feces are, lots of bacteria. So bacteria can more easily move it. It's not that males don't get urinary tract infections, sure they do, but it's more common in females. So let's take a look. I'll show you that anatomical difference between males and females. All right, and we could see here's the urinary bladder, and here's the urethra in the female, and then the urethra in the male. Of course, the urethra in the male passes through the penis, so it's going to be a bit longer, okay? So just harder to get bacteria up there and in the urinary system. So, all right. I hope that was interesting. The urinary system is quite interesting. Its functions are diverse. It affects so many things, and I hope you learned something. All right. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.